My name is Velma Pettiford, and I was 27 the day my entire family finally showed their true colors, or maybe the day I finally stopped pretending I didn't see them. I lived alone in a small, slightly outdated two-bedroom apartment I'd been renting since finishing trade school. The place wasn't glamorous, the paint chipped in some corners, the pipes moaned on cold nights, but it was mine. I'd earned it. I worked long shifts as a licensed electrician, crawling through attics, repairing rewiring disasters, surviving summers where the heat felt like walking inside a lit oven. I didn't spend money on vacations or new cars or fancy nights out. I didn't even splurge often on takeout. Every extra dollar I earned went into cash savings, literally under my mattress. Yeah, it sounded paranoid, I know, but after years of temporary loans to my family that were never paid back, I learned not to leave temptation lying inside a bank account. At least cash under my mattress couldn't be transferred after a guilt-tripping phone call. It was my emergency plan, my if things get bad enough, I'm gone money. And apparently, according to my father, it was also community property. I came home on a Saturday afternoon, exhausted and still smelling faintly of electrical tape, to find my dad sitting at my kitchen table like he owned it, leaned back, arms folded, wearing that smug half grin that meant he was about to say something awful and justify it as family. "Velma," he said warmly, "good timing. I have wonderful news. Your sister Claire's wedding? Huge success. Absolutely beautiful." I blinked. "Great? But what does that have to do with me?" He shrugged, the same casual little shrug he used whenever he'd already decided something and didn't care what I thought of it. "I found that money under your mattress, $25,000. I used it for the wedding. Think of it as your gift to your sister." I didn't speak. I didn't yell. I didn't even breathe at first. He said it so casually, like he'd borrowed a sweater, like it wasn't a single dollar of sweat-soaked overtime from the last 5 years of my life. "You, what?" I asked finally. "Oh, come on," he waved a hand. "You weren't using it, and family helps family. Claire and Martin will remember this forever." I stared at him, but inside, something quiet and cold unfolded. Something I hadn't felt in a very long time. "Control." "Understood," I said softly. Dad smirked, satisfied with himself, because for years that tone from me meant surrender. 2 minutes later, the apartment door opened and Grandpa walked in. He was in his 70s, moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp enough to slice steel. He carried his cane like a statement, not a support. When he stepped inside, he didn't even greet me. He looked straight at my father. "Son," Grandpa said, "that money I gave you to keep for me, where is it?" My father froze. Color drained out of his face so fast it was almost theatrical. I smiled, just a small one. Then I leaned toward Grandpa and whispered 3 quiet words into his ear. His entire expression hardened. Without another question, he pulled out his phone. Dialed. 30 seconds later, a knock at the door. A man in a black suit stepped inside, silent as a shadow, and slid a folder onto my kitchen table. My father swallowed hard. "Dad, it's not what you think." Grandpa didn't answer him. He opened the folder. Inside were photos of the cash stacks he'd entrusted to my father, a signed note from Dad acknowledging he was holding it, a printed text message where Dad promised he'd keep it safe until probate cleared. Dad's eyes darted to me, then Grandpa, then the man in the suit. "It's not," he began. "It's exactly what I think," Grandpa cut him off. "You took money that wasn't yours. And apparently, from what Velma tells me, you took her money too." Dad scoffed. "Defense mode. Manipulation mode." "That's an exaggeration. She wasn't using it. I thought—" "No," I said quietly. "You didn't think. You decided. You decided Claire's imported flowers and unnecessary fireworks were worth more than my safety net. You decided you had the right to go through my home, find my savings, and spend it." Dad snapped toward me. "You've been hoarding cash while your sister needed help, and you couldn't even offer? Family helps family, Velma." I nearly laughed. I've been helping family since I was old enough to earn a paycheck. I've paid repairs, bills, emergencies, debts, every time you snapped your fingers. And the one time, I kept something for myself, you stole it. "Stole?" His voice rose. "You're calling your own father a thief?" "That's what it's called," I answered, voice steady, "when you take something that isn't yours without asking." Grandpa leaned forward. "Where is the money?" Dad hesitated too long. "It's gone," he finally said. "Deposits, vendors, wedding expenses, non-refundable." Grandpa's jaw clenched. "Then you'll replace it." Every cent. With interest. You can't just demand. I absolutely can, Grandpa snapped. That cash was mine. And what you did to Velma, that's between you and her. But you will make me whole, or I will make sure the entire family and the law know exactly what you did. Dad looked at me with desperation now, the old signal I should swoop in and rescue him from consequences. But I stayed silent. I want my $25,000 back too, I said finally. Sell your car, cancel the honeymoon. I don't care how. I'm done pretending this doesn't matter. You'd humiliate your sister? Dad hissed. Ruin her big day because you're making a scene? You ruined it for me, I replied, when you took the money. The wedding isn't my problem. The man in the black suit finally spoke, voice smooth and absolute. I'll prepare the repayment contract. Miss the deadlines, and we take legal action. Dad opened his mouth again, but Grandpa stood abruptly. We're done here. He looked at me, just once. Good job holding your ground. Took you long enough. They walked out together, Grandpa steady, the suit man carrying the folder like a verdict. Dad remained slumped in my chair, shoulders fallen, face gray. You didn't have to bring him into this, he muttered. I grabbed my jacket. You brought him into it the second you touched his money. You just didn't think you'd get caught. As I walked out the door, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my adult life, the fallout wasn't mine to carry, it was his. And I wasn't lifting a finger to pull him out of it. The fallout began almost immediately. 2 days after Grandpa confronted him in my apartment, my dad called. I let the phone buzz on my countertop until it timed out. His voicemail was the same tired mix of irritation and forced reason he always used when he needed something from me. Velma, we need to talk. Let's work this out like family. No need to make things messy. Messy, that was his word for consequences. I didn't respond. By the end of the week, my mother started texting me long paragraphs about forgiveness, unity, and how Claire's wedding day shouldn't be overshadowed by a misunderstanding. She wrote it as if the $25,000 had simply misplaced itself, as if no one had dug their hands under my mattress and stolen it. But the real message came from Claire herself. She called me the night before her rehearsal dinner. No greeting, just an accusation, sharp and immediate. Velma, are you seriously doing this to me? Dad said you're demanding he pay back some ridiculous money. You're ruining my wedding over nothing. Nothing. Her voice was breathless, wounded, offended, as if she were the victim of some grand betrayal. Claire, I said calmly, Dad didn't use his money. He used mine. Money I saved for 5 years. Oh, please, she scoffed. You never helped with the planning. It's not like you needed that cash. And Dad said family helps family. I'm done being the family bank, I said, cutting her off. Silence, then a slow, angry exhale. You're unbelievable. The call ended with her hanging up on me. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty afterward. The repayment plan begins. Grandpa didn't waste time. By Monday, the repayment contract was drafted, signed, and delivered. Not just signed by Dad, witnessed, stamped, legally binding. The first payment was due in 2 weeks. Dad didn't call me again, but I heard through relatives what happened next. He sold his fishing boat. He canceled a trip he'd been bragging about for months. He whispered excuses, tried spinning different versions of the story. But Grandpa had already spoken to the family, plainly and without sugarcoating. Velma didn't ruin anything. Her father did. For the first time in my life, someone stood between me and my parents' guilt-ridden expectations. And that someone wasn't my boyfriend, my friends, or even myself. It was Grandpa, the only person in the family who'd ever bothered to treat me like I deserved better. Evan steps in. My boyfriend Evan came by one evening after work when he heard everything. He didn't say, I told you so, even though he probably thought it. He didn't tell me to stay calm or give them a chance. Instead, he sat beside me on the couch, fingers laced with mine, quiet for a long time before asking softly, Are you okay? Not angry, just, are you okay? It caught me off guard. I wasn't used to someone asking how I felt without following up with a favor or a guilt trip. I'm tired, I admitted, but I'm not letting them drag me back again. He nodded. Good, because the moment you said understood, that was the first time I saw you choose yourself. I didn't cry, but something inside me loosened, something that had been tied too tightly for too long. The wedding. Grandpa insisted I still attend the wedding. I know you don't want to, he said, but go. Let them see you're not the problem. And so I went. The venue was every inch the over-the-top spectacle Claire had always dreamed of. Waterfront view, imported flowers, live band, tables decorated in gold and silver accents. It was beautiful, It was expensive. It was everything I knew she and her fiancé could never have afforded without someone else's pockets being turned inside out. People smiled, cameras flashed, the whole event glittered like a fairy tale. But beneath it all, tension pulsed like a fault line waiting to crack. Mom avoided eye contact with me. Dad hovered around the bar, stiff and subdued. Claire barely looked my way, except once, when she shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. During the reception, Mom finally approached me. "Velma," she said, clutching her shawl like the room was colder than it was. "I just wish you could have let this go. For Claire." I stared at her. "Let what go? A year of my savings? My safety net? You make it sound worse than it is." Worse than it is. That sentence was the perfect summary of my entire upbringing. Before I could respond, Grandpa appeared beside me. "That's enough," he told my mother. "Velma did nothing wrong." Mom's mouth snapped shut. She walked away. Claire's voice rose behind us. She was arguing with a wedding planner about centerpieces. Something about the lilies being too last minute. Perfect metaphor for her entire life. Evan stayed close throughout the night, a calm presence in a sea of forced smiles. But I noticed, too, the subtle tension when Sabrina, his ex-girlfriend, appeared as a mutual friends +1. She flashed Evan a smile that was a little too warm. I felt that familiar little pinch of insecurity. But Evan squeezed my hand and whispered, "She's not part of my life anymore. Don't let her get in your head." And strangely, I believed him. The aftermath of the celebration. The wedding ended with applause and cheers and dozens of photos capturing a perfectly curated illusion. But I saw the truth behind every picture. The father of the bride forced into a repayment plan he hated, a mother choosing appearances over honesty, a sister resentful that the money funding her dream day came with consequences. And me, standing in a pretty dress, smiling for photos, knowing that beneath the surface, nothing about this family would ever be the same. When I left that night, Grandpa walked me to the parking lot. "You did good," he said gruffly. "Took courage." "I didn't feel courageous," I admitted. "I just felt tired." "That's when courage shows up," he replied. "When you've had enough." He squeezed my shoulder. For the first time in years, I felt protected. As I drove home, the wedding lights fading behind me, I understood something with sudden clarity. My family hadn't just crossed a line. They'd taught me exactly where to draw one. The strange thing about boundaries is that once you set them, the world doesn't explode. It just shifts. A week after the wedding, Dad made his first repayment. Grandpa made sure every penny passed through certified checks. Dad handed them over with the stiff, resentful posture of a man paying fines for a crime he still refused to acknowledge. And yet, he paid. Month after month, the payments continued. Dad gritted his teeth through each one, bitterness simmering just under the surface, but the contract was ironclad. He had no room to wiggle, no space to guilt, no rescue to expect from me. For once, his consequences were his. As for me, something unexpected happened. My life got quieter. No late-night calls from my mother about urgent help. No messages from Claire about wedding add-ons she wanted me to cover. No veiled comments about how Velma's doing well, she can contribute more. The silence felt unfamiliar at first, unnatural, and then liberating. Rebuilding myself. I picked up weekend gigs again, not because I needed to bail anyone out, but because I finally had the energy to want better for myself. I rebuilt my savings, slowly, deliberately, without fear someone would siphon it away. There were moments I caught myself glancing at the mattress out of habit. Then I remembered. My new savings lived somewhere different now, a safe deposit box, where guilt couldn't touch it. Evan supported me through all of it. He never tried to rush me, never said I was overreacting, never offered solutions I didn't ask for. Instead, he would sit with me after long days, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about mundane things like weekend plans or movies or what his neighbor's cat stole this time. Those simple evenings felt more healing than anything else. Sabrina, his ex, drifted into and out of social gatherings a few more times. Each time, she tried to plant little conversational barbs, probing, intrusive comments masked as harmless gossip. But Evan never gave her the attention she wanted. And eventually, she stopped trying. It was the first time in my life someone chose me without hesitation and continued choosing me. Dad and I become polite strangers. By the time Dad had repaid half the debt, the family had stopped pretending everything was normal. Some relatives avoided the topic. Some sided with Grandpa. A few whispered that Dad had always been a bit careless with boundaries. One evening, months later, Dad showed up unannounced at my apartment. He didn't knock loud, just one soft tap. When I opened the door, he looked older, not physically, but in the way a person looks when the world no longer bends for them. "I'm making the payments," he said stiffly, as if expecting praise. "I know," I replied. "The receipts come to me too." An awkward silence stretched. Finally, he said, "Your sister feels you haven't forgiven her." "I'm not angry at Claire," I said. "I'm just done being taken advantage of." He opened his mouth to guilt-trip me. I saw the familiar inhale, the shift of his shoulders, and then he stopped himself, just stared at the floor. Oh. That was when I realized the dynamic had changed. He knew manipulation wouldn't work anymore. We didn't talk long, and when he left, I didn't feel guilt or satisfaction, just neutrality. Maybe that was the beginning of peace. A year later, 12 months passed. Dad finished repaying Grandpa. Then he finished repaying me. Every cent. When I held the final check in my hands, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. I deposited it in my safe deposit box, closed the metal drawer, and just stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't tied to my family by obligation, guilt, or debt. Just choice. The diner meeting. One afternoon, Dad texted me. "Dinner? Public place. No money talk. Just reconnecting." Old Velma would have jumped at the opportunity, desperate to feel wanted. New Velma read it twice, then simply sent, "Okay." We met at a small diner near his neighborhood, the kind with squeaky booths and laminated menus. When I walked in, he stood to greet me, an old reflex of politeness I hadn't seen in him in decades. Conversation was light. Small talk, football, work, Claire's latest business venture that might finally take off. He didn't push, he didn't prod, he didn't guilt. For once, we were two adults having a simple, neutral conversation. Then the check came. The waitress placed it gently in the middle of the table. Dad stared at it for a moment. In the past, he would have slid it toward me without hesitation. Instead, he hesitated, waiting, testing, hoping the old pattern might return. I didn't move. He paid. We walked out together, exchanged a brief, polite goodbye, and parted ways like acquaintances who shared a past but not a future. As I walked to my car, I felt light, like I had just stepped out of a role I'd been forced to play my entire life. The final shift. That night, after I got home, I opened the drawer where I kept my safe deposit key. I held it between my fingers. A simple piece of metal, yet it felt like the symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. My safety, my dignity, my future. The next morning, I booked a weekend trip. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet lake, a cabin, and a few days without anyone demanding anything from me. I paid with my own card. Packed light. Left my phone on silent. No emergency text followed. No guilt. No obligations. That silence was the loudest affirmation I'd ever heard. Boundaries aren't betrayal. They are self-respect. And I had finally learned how to protect mine.